You know, Jacob had just told his wives that God had told him to get up and get out of there and go back home to be in Canaan. And so we continue reading in Genesis 31:14 to 18. Starting in verse 14. And Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, Is there yet any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? Are we not counted of him as strangers? For he sold us and has quite devoured also our money. For all the riches which God hath taken from our father, that is ours and our children's. Now then, whatsoever God has said unto you, do. Then Jacob rose up, set his sons and his wives upon camels, and he carried away all his cattle and all his goods which he had gotten, the cattle of his getting, which he had gotten in Paddan Aram, for to go to Isaac his father in the land of Canaan. So, after Jacob had told his wives that the Lord had asked him to move back home to Canaan, his wives answered him, Is there anything left for us? We've got no reason any longer to expect any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house. Leah and Rachel had both been alienated from their father by his disregard of their feelings and by his mean attitude towards them, both at their marriage and ever since. It was plain by now he never intended to give them anything, but kept all he had to himself, or designated it for his sons. There's a lot of truth to the old saying, the love of money is the root of all evil. He even lost interest and love for his daughters. They continued, Are we not counted of our father as strangers? Leah and Rachel reveal here that they had long resented the way their father had sold them to Jacob. Laban had sold them to Jacob for 14 years' service of free labor. And Jacob counted it all worth it. He sold them to Jacob for 14 years free labor, as if they had been his slaves, instead of giving dowries with them as his children to provide a base for his daughter's future financial security. This goes along with their next statement. Laban hath quite devoured also our money. Instead of giving to them a portion of the proceeds from Jacob's hard work as their portion, as the part of their dowry, Laban spent it on himself and his sons, and there was nothing left for them. See, for all the riches which God hath taken from our father, they said, that is ours and our children. They recognized God took away so much from their father, and that's how they became rich. And you know what was so beautiful? both Leah and Rachel included Jacob. He was the part of us. All the riches which God had taken from our father, that is ours and our children's. The exorbitant price extracted from Jacob made them love Jacob, their husband, but resent Laban, their father. And then they said, "Now then, whatsoever God has said to you, do it." Jacob's wives cheerfully consented to his resolve to return home to Canaan. They were willing to go along with their husband and put themselves with him under the divine direction and protection of Almighty God. Did you get that? They wanted to leave willingly. Then God rose up and set his sons and his wives upon the camels, and he carried away all his cattle and all his substance, in other words, everything he owned, which he had gathered. Now, the cattle of his getting, which he had gathered in Padam Aram, to go to Isaac, his father, unto the land of Canaan. He was ready to leave. And again, as far as the cattle was concerned, he carried away all the cattle. They defined it as the cattle of his getting. He was careful to leave only with the cattle of his getting. He did say to Laban, remember under the agreement, if he had gotten the single-hued ones into his flock, it would be counted to him as theft, as being stolen. So he was really careful. Now, he left in a hurry. This is what we read, knowing that Laban would probably have tried to stop them. For this reason, we read in verse 20, which is actually in the next session of Genesis. It said, Jacob outwitted Laban the Syrian, in that he did not tell him that he fled. They did not just think they were moving away. They were fleeing. See, staying with Laban would have been toxic. Remember the dirty looks that the Laban's sons gave him. And even Laban, whoa, if looks could kill. Staying with Laban meant being trapped in a competition of who can out-deceive who. Staying with Laban meant being relentlessly enticed by idolatry of the culture. As we study Genesis more, you'll find where I got this from. So now, as I was studying this, as Jacob and his family were fleeing, I remembered what Paul, the apostle, 1,600 years later, was writing to his disciple, his son in the faith, Timothy. You see, this quote could be addressing all who are trapped in some way by some society pressures, who are trapped in some way by things that would cause them to fear. He said to Timothy, but thou, in 1 Timothy 6:11, but thou, O man of God, flee these things and follow after righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, meekness. Do you realize when I became a disciple of Jesus, I didn't have to be told it twice.